Everyone, tonight we're doing something special. A live read-along of 10 terrifying real paranormal encounters. As I go through each story, I'll pause to check in with the chat, hear your thoughts, and maybe even read some of your own experiences if you want to share. So grab your headphones, dim the lights, and let's get into it. I grew up in an old 2-story house that my parents bought when I was about 6 years old. It was built sometime in the 1920s, and although it had been renovated here and there, most of its structure still felt original. The hardwood floors, the old wallpaper, and most of all, the staircase. That staircase was the kind of thing you'd see in a classic horror movie. It had a polished wooden banister, but the steps themselves were warped with age. They didn't just squeak. They groaned and cracked like they were straining under invisible weight. During the day, the sound was almost comforting,
that staircase
a reminder
was the kind of
that the
thing
house
you'd see
was lived
in a
in.
classic horror
But at
movie.
night,
It had a polished
that creaking
wooden
became
banister,
something else entirely.
but the steps themselves
started
were
when I was
warped with
around
age.
12.
They didn't
Almost
just squeak.
every night,
They
sometime
groaned
after
and
2 in the
structure
morning,
straining under
I'd hear the same thing, slow, deliberate footsteps down the stairs. They were heavy, not like my mom's or my sister's light steps, and not hurried like my dad's when he got up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. These footsteps had weight to them, a steady rhythm. The first time it happened, I was sure it was my dad. Maybe he was checking the doors or grabbing a glass of water. But curiosity got the better of me, so I quietly slid out of bed and cracked my door open just enough to peek into the hallway. Nothing. The hallway was dark, and the faint nightlight plugged in at the end of the hall cast its usual dim glow. The sound of footsteps had stopped the moment I opened my door, like whoever or whatever, it had frozen in place. I stared into that empty hallway for what felt like an eternity. My heart was pounding, but eventually I convinced myself I was just tired and imagining things. I shut the door, crawled back into bed, and tried to fall asleep, but I couldn't shake it. The following nights, the same thing happened. The footsteps, the climb up the stairs, always around the same time, always stopping right outside my door. I'd hold my breath, listening so closely that my ears would ring from the silence after.
And tried to fall asleep.
Weeks turned into
but I
months,
couldn't shake it.
and it became
The following
almost
nights,
routine.
the same thing
I'd go to
happened.
bed wondering
The
if I'd hear
footsteps,
them again.
the climb up
and
the
sure
stairs,
enough, around 2
always
o'clock
around
in
the
the
same
morning,
time, always
that
stopping
familiar
right
creak of the
outside
first
my door.
stair would start.
I'd hold my
then
breath,
another,
listening
then
so
another,
closely that
until
my
they
ears
reached the
rang
top
from the
landing.
silence after
And
trying
then
to fall
silence.
asleep. Turned
I
into
tried
couldn't
telling my
shake it, and
parents,
it became
but they
following
brushed
nights,
it off.
the same thing.
I'd old houses make noise,
hear them again.
my dad said.
Sure enough,
My mom
always
suggested
around
it
the
was
same
just the
time,
wood
always
expanding
familiar
and
creak of the
contracting
first
due
door
to
would start.
temperature.
I'd hold my
Even
breath,
my older sister teased me about it, saying I was letting scary movies get into my head. But I knew what I was hearing. Wood expanding didn't mimic the exact rhythm of footsteps, so I decided to test it. One night, I left my door cracked open just an inch or two, just enough for me to see the hallway without being obvious. I turned off my lamp, pulled the covers up to my chin, and waited. Sure enough, the footsteps came. Slow, heavy, deliberate. They climbed the stairs closer and closer until I could see the faint outline of a shadow cast against the far wall. My breath caught in my throat. The steps stopped right outside my room. I could see something there, just the faintest shape, darker than the hallway around it, like someone was standing directly in front of my door. My chest was tight, my body frozen, every instinct in me screaming not to move. And then, the door that I had left cracked open, barely open at all, suddenly began to close. Not fast, not slammed, but pushed, slowly, deliberately. I watched in complete horror as the sliver of hallway light disappeared, until there was only darkness. Then, with the softest click, the latch caught. I didn't sleep that night. After that, things got worse. The footsteps didn't just stop outside my room anymore. Sometimes I'd hear them pacing the hallway. Once, I swore I heard them right outside my sister's door, pausing like they were listening. Another time, they stopped at the bathroom across from me, and the faint sound of the door creaking echoed through the still house, though no one ever went in. I never saw a face. I never heard a voice. Just those footsteps, night after night. One night, though, I broke my own rule. I decided to wait for them, really wait. I sat up in bed with the covers pulled tight around me and stared directly at the door, my heart racing in anticipation. And when the footsteps came, I was ready. The creaks started at the bottom of the staircase, one by one. My skin prickled as they drew closer. And then, just as they reached the top landing, the hallway light flickered, only for a second, but enough that I knew I hadn't imagined it. The shadow appeared again, stretched across the wall. But this time, I swear I saw it move. Not just a stationary shadow standing there, but a shift, a lean, like whoever it was had pressed their head closer to the crack in my door, trying to peer inside. The door creaked, not closing this time, but nudging open, as if an unseen hand was testing it. My breath caught, couldn't scream, couldn't move. I just sat there watching, praying it would stop, and then all at once silence. The footsteps retreated, slowly at first, then faster until I heard nothing at all. I didn't leave my room until morning. Years later, when I was a teenager, I brought it up again. My parents still brushed it off, but this time my sister admitted something. She said she had heard it too. She remembered waking up some nights to the sound of someone walking the hallway, pausing outside her room. She had even thought it was me, sneaking around at night, until she realized the steps were too heavy, too slow. We never figured out what it was. Back in college, I lived off campus in a small rental house with 2 roommates. It wasn't anything special. An old beige house with creaky floors, outdated carpet, and walls so thin you could hear someone sneezing in the next room. Still, it was cheap, and for 3 broke college students, that was good enough. We each had our own room, and mine was at the far end of the hallway. My roommates were good guys. One was Josh, a loud, sarcastic type who was always joking around. The other was Brandon, who was quieter, more reserved, and spent most of his time either studying or hanging out with his girlfriend. The house always had that lived-in energy, TV murmuring in the living room, the sound of music from someone's phone speaker, or footsteps going back and forth down the hallway. You get used to it. The noises of roommates become part of the background, part of your sense of security. But at night, when everything went still, the place could feel very empty. That's why what happened still bothers me to this day. It was around 3 in the morning when I woke up to the feeling that someone was in my room. You know how sometimes your body senses it before your brain fully registers it? That's what happened. My eyes blinked open, adjusting to the faint glow from the streetlight outside filtering through my blinds. And that's when I saw him. One of my roommates, Brandon, was standing at the foot of my bed. At first, I wasn't even alarmed, just confused. He was facing me, but not moving, just standing there like he was waiting for something. I remember saying his name, my voice groggy from sleep. "Brandon, what are you doing?" He didn't answer. He didn't even flinch. He just stared at me, not with anger, not with fear, just a blank, unreadable expression that made me uncomfortable the longer I looked at him. I sat up a little, rubbing my eyes. "Dude, seriously, what's up?" That's when he turned. Slowly, without a word, he pivoted on his heel and walked out of my room. I heard the door click shut behind him. I lay there, confused, but not exactly scared, just unsettled. I figured maybe he'd been half asleep or looking for something. Either way, I was too tired to think much more about it. I fell back asleep within minutes. The next morning, I brought it up casually at breakfast. Josh was already in the kitchen, pouring cereal, and a few minutes later Brandon walked in. I laughed a little and said, "Hey man, what was that about last night? You scared the hell out of me, standing in my room at 3 in the morning." He stopped mid-step and looked at me like I'd just spoken another language. "What are you talking about?" he asked. I set my spoon down. You came into my room last night. You were literally standing at the foot of my bed. I talked to you, and then you walked out and shut the door. Brandon shook his head immediately. No, I wasn't here. I stayed at my girlfriend's place last night. I didn't even come home. I laughed at first, waiting for him to smirk or say he was messing with me. But his expression never changed. He was serious, dead serious. Josh looked between us, frowning. Wait, are you for real? You weren't home. Brandon swore on it. He said he'd been at his girlfriend's all night. Even showed me a couple of texts they'd exchanged around midnight. I didn't know what to say. I tried to argue, tried to explain what I saw, but the words felt hollow coming out of my mouth. Because deep down, I knew what I saw too clearly for it to be some dream. I was awake. I spoke to him. I watched him leave. So if it wasn't Brandon standing at the foot of my bed, then who or what was it? That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. A week later, something similar happened. I was studying late into the night, headphones on, when I felt movement behind me. I turned, expecting to see Josh or Brandon, but there was no one there. My door was half open, and the hallway beyond it was empty. I chalked it up to being jumpy, but then, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I heard my door creak, just slightly, like someone was pushing it open. I looked up, and in the faint glow from the streetlight, I could see the edge of the door shifting, inch by inch, but nobody came in. It stopped halfway, leaving the door cracked open. I stared at it for what felt like an hour, waiting for someone to step through. Nothing did. Eventually, I grabbed my phone and texted Josh, asking if he'd just been in my room. He replied almost instantly, "No, dude. I'm at the library." Brandon wasn't home either. That meant I was alone in the house. I got up, turned on every light, and checked the hallway, the living room, even the kitchen. Empty. Doors locked. Windows shut. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't actually alone. After that night, I started noticing other strange things. Small, subtle things. Sometimes, in the early hours of the morning, I'd wake up with the feeling of someone standing right next to the bed. I'd open my eyes, and there'd be nothing there. But the feeling lingered, heavy and oppressive. Another time, Josh mentioned that he swore he saw Brandon walk past the kitchen while he was cooking late at night. But when he called out to him, no one answered. He checked both bedrooms. Brandon wasn't home. It was like something in that house was pretending to be us. I don't know why it focused on Brandon the most, but it always seemed to appear as him. Maybe because he was quiet, easy to mimic. Or maybe whatever it was just chose him at random. The night that convinced me I wasn't crazy happened about a month later. I woke up again around 3 in the morning. First, everything was still. But then I heard it, the soft, deliberate sound of footsteps coming down the hall. I sat up, my heart already pounding. The steps stopped right outside my door. Then, slowly, the door began to open. And standing there, silhouetted against the faint hallway light, was Brandon. He just stood there, half in the doorway, staring at me. His face was blank, his body motionless. "Brandon," I whispered. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't say a word. I reached over and flicked on my lamp. The light filled the room, and the doorway was empty. No one was there. The door was wide open, but the hallway beyond was completely still. I barely slept at all after that. The next morning, Brandon came home from his girlfriend's place. I didn't even bother asking him where he'd been. I already knew. He wasn't here. We moved out of that house at the end of the semester. I never saw the figure again after that, but the memory still haunts me, because I can't forget the way it stood there at the foot of my bed, or the way it seemed to wear my roommate's face like a mask. And sometimes late at night I wonder, if I hadn't spoken, if I had just stayed quiet, what would it have done next? If you woke up and saw a roommate or family member in your room, only to learn they weren't home, what would you do? Let me know in the chat. A few years ago, I went on a solo road trip across several states. The whole plan was pretty loose. I just wanted to drive, stop where I wanted, and see parts of the country I hadn't seen before. Most of the time, I'd find decent motels along the way. Nothing fancy, but clean enough with working locks and beds that didn't feel like stone. But one night, I wasn't so lucky. I'd been on the road for almost 12 hours straight. By the time I pulled off the highway, it was nearly midnight. I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere, just flat stretches of road and the occasional gas station. The only lodging option for miles was a little roadside motel with a flickering neon sign that simply read, "Rooms vacancy." It wasn't exactly welcoming. The lot was half empty, weeds growing up through cracks in the pavement, and most of the windows looked dark. But I was too exhausted to keep driving, so I parked, checked in, and got a key to a ground floor room at the far end. The room was exactly what you'd expect from a cheap roadside motel. Faded carpet, scratchy sheets, a lamp that buzzed faintly when I turned it on. But I didn't care. I was just grateful for a bed. I locked the door, drew the thin curtains shut, and collapsed. I must have been asleep for an hour or two when something woke me. At first, I thought it was a dream because I was half aware of a sound but couldn't place it. Then I sat up in the dark, straining to listen. It was the sound of a woman crying. Not loud but steady, muffled, like someone trying not to be heard. It was coming from the bathroom. I remember my first thought was that someone had gotten into my room. The idea made my skin crawl. I reached over, turned on the bedside lamp, and forced myself to get up. The crying didn't stop. It was clearer now, the sound of soft sobs echoing off tile. I stood outside the bathroom door, my hand hovering over the knob. My heart was racing, every instinct telling me not to open it. But I pushed the door open anyway. The light flicked on, revealing an empty bathroom. The shower curtain was drawn back, the sink spotless, the floor bare. No one was there, and the crying had stopped. I stood there for a long time, staring at that empty bathroom, trying to make sense of what I just heard. Finally, I shut the light off, shook my head, and crawled back into bed. But the moment I lay down, the crying started again. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the bathroom. It was right next to me. The sound was so close it felt like someone was lying in the bed with me, turned toward me, sobbing into the pillow. I froze. My body went rigid, every hair on my arm standing on end. I couldn't even bring myself to turn and look. I just lay there wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling while the crying went on and on. It wasn't a normal cry either. The longer I listened, the more I realized it wasn't just sadness in the voice. There was pain, desperation, like whoever it was had lost everything. I don't know how long I lay there, but eventually, the crying stopped as suddenly as it started. The silence was so heavy I almost wished the sound would return, just so I'd know what I was dealing with. I finally worked up the courage to turn my head. The bed beside me was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat up with the lamp on, staring at the empty space next to me until morning. When the sun finally came through the blinds, I felt a little braver. I packed up my things quickly and went to the front desk to check out. The woman at the desk was older, with tired eyes that suggested she'd been working there for years. I debated whether to say anything, but as she handed me my receipt, I couldn't help blurting it out. "Hey, has anyone ever complained about weird noises in the rooms? Like crying or anything?" She froze, just for a split second, but I caught it. Then she forced a small smile and said, "Old buildings make all kinds of noises. I'm sure it was nothing." Her tone was dismissive, but her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She knew exactly what I was talking about. I didn't press it. I just left. But as I was walking out to my car, I glanced back at the row of rooms. For just a moment, in the window of the one I'd stayed in, I thought I saw the faint outline of a woman's figure standing behind the curtain. I got in my car and drove away as fast as I could. To this day, I don't know what I encountered in that motel room. Maybe it was the spirit of someone who had died there, still trapped in that space. Maybe it was something darker, feeding off loneliness and fear. All I know is, I've never stayed in a roadside motel like that again. And when I hear the sound of someone crying at night, even faintly in a movie or on TV, I feel my stomach knot up. Because that night, I learned that sometimes the things that sound the most human are the ones you should fear the most. Drop a face screaming in fear in the chat if you would have checked out of that motel immediately. When I was about 13 years old, I experienced something in my bedroom that I still think about to this day. I grew up in a pretty normal suburban house. Nothing creepy about it, at least on the surface. My bedroom was at the end of the hall, and like most kids my age, I had a closet in the corner. It wasn't a walk-in closet, just one of those small ones with sliding wooden doors that always seemed to stick halfway on their track. I never really thought much about it until that night. I remember waking up suddenly, in the middle of the night, for no clear reason. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I turned over in bed, letting my eyes adjust to the faint glow from the streetlight outside my window. And that's when I saw it. In the corner of my room, inside my closet, crouched low to the ground, was a man. First, I thought I was dreaming. My heart skipped, my stomach dropped. He was crouched in this unnatural position, knees bent, one arm braced against the inside wall of the closet, his head tilted just slightly forward. He wasn't moving, but I could see his outline clearly against the darkness. The longer I looked, the more detail I thought I could make out, like the suggestion of a face, maybe even eyes staring directly at me. I screamed. I bolted upright in bed, shouting for my mom. Within seconds, she came running in, flicking on the overhead light. My room lit up, banishing all the shadows. She rushed over, asking what was wrong, and I pointed, stammering, at the closet. She slid the door all the way open. It was empty, nothing inside but my clothes and a few boxes stacked on the floor. I felt ridiculous, but I couldn't shake how real it had looked. My mom tried to calm me down, saying it was just a nightmare, maybe a shadow from the streetlight outside. She tucked me back into bed, reassured me, and eventually left the room. But I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that crouching figure burned into the darkness behind my eyelids. The next night, I went to bed early, determined not to scare myself again. I even checked the closet before lying down, pushed the door open, looked inside, and saw nothing unusual. I shut it tight, climbed under the covers, and told myself it had all been in my head. But sometime after midnight, I woke again. First, everything seemed normal. Then I heard it, the faintest creak of wood. My eyes darted toward the closet. The door, shut tight when I went to bed, was now slowly sliding open. The sound was agonizingly slow, the wooden track groaning as the door shifted inch by inch. I froze. My throat went dry. I wanted to scream again, but no sound came out. I just lay there, staring as the door slid wider and wider, the darkness inside growing deeper. And in that darkness, for a split second, I thought I saw something move. Not much, just the faintest shift, like someone pulling back deeper into the shadows. Couldn't take it. I jumped out of bed, ran down the hall, and shook my mom awake. She followed me back, annoyed but concerned, and checked the closet again. Of course, it was empty. She insisted I was just spooking myself. "You're 13, not 5, she said gently. But I knew what I saw. For the rest of the week, I begged to sleep with my closet light on. My mom finally gave in, and with that soft glow filling the room, nothing happened. No figures, no creaking door. For a while, I convinced myself it really had been my imagination. Until the night I forgot to leave the light on. That night, I woke to the sound of shuffling. A soft, deliberate sound, like fabric brushing against wood. My heart pounded as I slowly turned toward the closet. The door was half open again, and I swear, I saw a hand, pale fingers curling around the edge of the door, as though someone was holding it, waiting. I yanked the covers over my head and didn't come out until morning. After that, I started sleeping with the closet door wide open, thinking that maybe if I could see inside, it wouldn't scare me. But somehow that made it worse. Sometimes, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and feel certain that someone was standing just inside, watching me. It never escalated beyond that. Nothing ever grabbed me. Nothing ever stepped fully into the room. But the presence of it, the possibility, was enough to haunt me. When I eventually moved out of that house, I thought I was done with it. But even now, as an adult, I can't sleep with the closet door cracked open. It has to be either shut all the way or open with the light on. Because every once in a while, when I wake in the middle of the night, I swear I can still see him. The man crouching, waiting in the shadows, just beyond the edge of the door. Be honest. Do you sleep with your closet door open or closed? I want to know how brave this chat really is. When I was about 19, I lived in a small town where everything was within walking distance. If you wanted to get from one end of town to the other, it usually took about 20 minutes on foot. There was this old cemetery that sat right in the middle of town. Most people avoided it at night, even adults, but for me it was just a shortcut. If I cut through the main gravel path that split the cemetery in half, it shaved at least 10 minutes off the walk. The cemetery itself was huge. Rows and rows of old gravestones, some leaning from years of weathering, others almost swallowed by the earth. There were a few mausoleums, big stone structures with locked iron doors, and oak trees that cast long, crooked shadows even under the dim glow of the street lamps lining the road outside the gates. During the day, it wasn't creepy at all. People walked their dogs through there, joggers cut across it, and sometimes you'd even see kids riding bikes along the paths. At night, though, the entire place changed. The silence was heavier, like the air itself carried the weight of everyone buried there. One night, after hanging out at a friend's house, I decided to take the shortcut home. It was close to midnight, and the streets were quiet. The cemetery gate was unlocked, as it usually was, and I stepped inside. The gravel crunched under my sneakers as I walked. The air was cool, the kind of sharp chill that creeps up your arms, even when the rest of the night is warm. I kept my head down, hands in my pockets, just focused on getting through quickly. But about halfway in, I froze. I heard something. At first, I thought it was the wind through the trees, but no, it was too distinct, too deliberate. It was whispering, came from directly behind me. The sound was soft, low, like 2 or 3 voices murmuring just out of earshot. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Hushed, urgent, like people speaking in secrecy. I whipped around, expecting to see someone, maybe a late-night wanderer or kids messing around. But the path behind me was empty. The gravestones stretched into the darkness, shadows long and still. No movement, no one there. I stood frozen, my pulse quickening, telling myself it was just in my head. But then the whispers came again, closer. I spun around in a full circle, scanning every direction. Nothing, not a single person in sight. I turned back toward the path and started walking faster. My shoes crunched loudly on the gravel, but even over that sound, I could hear it, the whispering, still behind me, still following. It didn't fade. It didn't grow distant. It stayed right there, just a few steps behind, as if whoever, or whatever, was keeping pace with me. I tried to tell myself maybe the acoustics of the place were playing tricks. Maybe it was just sound carrying from the road. But when I glanced toward the street outside the gates, I could see it was completely empty. No cars, no people. Nothing but silence. The whispers, though, never stopped. My walk turned into a speed walk, then into a jog. I kept my eyes locked on the cemetery gate ahead, lit faintly by the orange glow of a streetlight. It felt impossibly far away, like I was running towards something that wasn't getting closer. The voices grew more urgent, more overlapping, like dozens of people whispering at once. I still couldn't make out a single word, but I could feel it in my bones. Whatever they were saying wasn't meant for me to understand. It was like being surrounded by voices that weren't speaking to me, but speaking about me. I broke into a full sprint. My breath came in sharp bursts, my chest tightening with panic. I didn't dare look behind me now. I just ran. When I finally reached the gate, I shoved it open so hard it clanged against the metal fence. The moment I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the whispers stopped, just gone. The silence that followed was deafening. My ears rang with it. I stood there for a long moment, doubled over, catching my breath, my heart hammering in my chest. When I finally worked up the courage to look back through the gate, the cemetery was as still as stone. Rows of gravestones under the moonlight, shadows stretching in every direction, nothing out of place. But I swear, I felt eyes on me. I walked the rest of the way home the long way, sticking to the streets and avoiding the cemetery entirely. For days after, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there had been people inside, hidden in the shadows. Maybe the wind really had carried voices from somewhere else. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had been followed. Not by footsteps, not by a person, but by something that lived in those graves. Something that wanted me to know I wasn't welcome. I never cut through the cemetery at night again. Even now, when I pass it during the day, I feel uneasy. Like if I stepped inside, the whispers would start up all over again. Because I'll never forget the way they followed me, step for step all the way to the gate, and how they only stopped once I was out. Would you ever walk through a cemetery alone at night? Yes or no in chat. When I was a teenager, my friends and I used to look for dumb ways to scare each other. You know, the kind of late-night games you play at sleepovers when you're too wired on soda and chips to fall asleep. Someone would bring up Bloody Mary, the Ouija board, or light as a feather stiff as a board. And before you knew it, we were all daring each other to try it. But one night, a new game was suggested. It wasn't one I'd ever heard of before. My friend Alex called it the mirror game. We were sitting in his basement, half bored, half tired, when he brought it up. He said he read about it online. How if you stared into a mirror at midnight, said your own name over and over again, eventually your reflection would start to move on its own. First, everyone laughed. It sounded like just another Bloody Mary knockoff. But then my other friend, Jenna, chimed in with this serious look on her face. She swore she'd seen videos of it, or at least something like it. She said people claimed their reflections would do something unnatural, smile when they weren't, or blink out of sync. Sometimes, she said, the reflection didn't stop moving even after you walked away. Of course, the more she hyped it up, the more everyone wanted someone to try it. And, naturally, the group turned to me. I was the one who always got talked into these things. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't like being called a coward. So I agreed. The rule was that it had to be done at exactly midnight. No lights except a candle. No one else in the room but you. You had to stand in front of the mirror and say your own name slowly, 5 times. If nothing happened, fine. You just walked away. But if something did happen, well, none of them could really say what exactly would happen, because no one they knew had ever actually done it. By the time the clock hit 11:58, my heart was already pounding. Alex's parents had one of those old-style standing mirrors in the upstairs hallway. Tall, wooden frame, kind of warped at the edges from age. Perfect for the so-called mirror game. The others walked me upstairs, laughing and whispering, until we got to the hallway. They set up a candle on a little table in front of the mirror, then all backed away like it was some kind of ritual. I'll admit, part of me wanted to chicken out, but with all of them watching, I wasn't about to back down. At 12 o'clock on the dot, I stepped into the hallway. Alex shut the door behind me, and just like that, it was me, the candle, and my reflection. I stared at myself for a moment before starting. The flickering candlelight made my reflection look distorted, like the shadows were stretching parts of my face. My eyes looked darker than usual, hollow even. I shook it off and said my name. Once, twice, 3 times, 4, 5, and then, nothing. I just stood there, staring at myself. My heart slowed down. I almost laughed out loud. It was stupid. Nothing was going to happen. But then, something changed. It was subtle at first. My reflection looked wrong. My eyes seemed slightly bigger in the mirror than they really were. The pupils just a little too wide. My head tilted, but I hadn't moved. That's when my reflection smiled. I wasn't smiling. In fact, I felt my face go pale, frozen in shock. Yet the reflection's mouth curved upward into this slow, unnatural grin, stretching wider and wider until it looked painful. I took a step back, my arms stiff at my sides. But in the mirror, my reflection raised its hand, slowly, deliberately, and pressed its palm flat against the glass. My own hand stayed where it was. That was the moment I realized I couldn't move. It was like something had locked me in place. My legs refused to back away. My arms wouldn't lift. I was stuck, staring at that smiling version of myself with its hand against the glass. The candle flickered harder, like a sudden draft swept through the hall, but there was no wind. And then, the reflection's hand started to push through. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but the glass rippled, like water. The reflection's fingers pressed through the surface, dripping with this black, tar-like liquid, and I swear I could hear faint scratching sounds, like nails dragging on the inside of the mirror. Finally, I managed to let out a sound, not a scream, but a kind of gasp, and just like that, I stumbled backward. The spell broke. The reflection froze, its hand halfway through the glass, that horrible grin still plastered across its face. And then, in an instant, it snapped back. One moment its hand was stretching toward me, and the next, it was just a reflection again. My reflection, except the smile lingered for half a second longer than it should have. I didn't wait around to see what would happen next. I threw open the door and bolted downstairs. Of course, when I told my friends what happened, they laughed. They said I was just scaring myself, that the candlelight and nerves made me imagine things. But there was one detail I didn't tell them. When I slammed the door open, I glanced at the mirror one last time. My reflection didn't move with me. It just stood there, still smiling, watching me leave. The next day, I tried to brush it off as my imagination. Maybe it really was just a trick of the shadows and the stress of trying to summon something creepy. But later that night, when I was brushing my teeth before bed, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Every time I glanced at my reflection, it was a split second behind. I'd lift my toothbrush, and then my reflection would lift its toothbrush. I'd blink, and then it would blink. Always a fraction of a second delayed. It only lasted a few moments at a time, but it was enough to make me start avoiding mirrors altogether. Weeks passed, and I told myself I was fine. I convinced myself I was imagining it. That's what I wanted to believe. Anyway, until one night, I was half asleep when I heard something from my bathroom. The faint sound of running water. My bathroom was attached to my room, so I thought maybe I hadn't turned the sink off. When I got up and pushed the door open, the sink was off, but the mirror above it was fogged over, like steam from a hot shower, except I hadn't taken one. And there, written in the condensation with a finger, were two words: "Let me." I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I covered every mirror in my room with sheets. I even avoided looking into them at school, using my phone camera instead if I needed to check something. But the thing is, you can't avoid mirrors forever. They're everywhere. And sometimes, when I pass by one without meaning to, I catch it. That smile, that hand, waiting to press through, that version of me that isn't really me. I don't play games anymore, especially not with mirrors. Because once you see your reflection move on its own, you realize maybe you're not the one who's in control. Maybe they are. Who here has ever tried a scary ritual or challenge like Bloody Mary or Ouija boards? Type it in chat. I'll read some of them. When I was about 15, my family lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood. You know the kind, neatly cut lawns, mailboxes lined up perfectly, and most of the families had been there for decades. Everyone knew everyone, except for the house across the street. That house had been empty for as long as I could remember. The paint was peeling, the windows were dusty, and the grass was always overgrown, even though the city sent people every once in a while to mow it down. My parents told me it had been abandoned for over 10 years, ever since the last owner passed away and no one claimed the property. As a kid, I thought it was just another creepy old house. The kind you avoid walking past at night because the shadows in the windows seemed too dark. But as I got older, I stopped thinking about it. It was just part of the scenery. Until one night, I was in my room, sitting at my desk doing homework. My window overlooked the street, and I had the blinds half open. It was late, maybe close to midnight, when I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. That's when I noticed movement across the street. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but when I looked closer, my stomach dropped. There, in the second-story window of the abandoned house, was someone. They were standing perfectly still, facing my room, their silhouette framed by the dirty glass. I couldn't make out details, just the outline of a head and shoulders, and they were staring directly at me. I froze, my pencil still in my hand. I told myself it couldn't be possible. That house was empty. Everyone knew it was empty, but no matter how much I blinked, the figure stayed there, unmoving, watching. I yanked my blinds shut so fast that the cord snapped against the wall. My heart was racing as I sat back down, trying to tell myself I'd imagined it. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. The next morning, I brought it up at breakfast. "Dad, I think I saw someone in the old house across the street last night," I said. He looked up from his coffee with an amused expression. "That place? No one's lived there in years." "I'm serious," I said. "Someone was in the window, just standing there, staring." My mom shook her head. "Honey, that house has been abandoned since before you were in grade school. You probably just saw a shadow or the curtains moving." "But there aren't any curtains," I said quietly. They both gave me the same look parents give their kids when they think they're just spooked by their imagination. I let it go, at least out loud, but I couldn't get the image out of my head. That night, I told myself I wasn't going to look. I pulled my blinds all the way shut before the sun even went down. But curiosity eats at you. Around midnight, I found myself slowly pulling one blind open, just enough to peek across the street. The window was empty. I exhaled, relieved. Maybe I really had imagined it. But as I started to close the blinds again, the figure stepped into view. Same window, same silhouette, still staring. This time, I dropped the blinds and backed away like the thing could see me through the gap. I didn't sleep at all that night. Over the next week, it kept happening. Not every night. That's what made it worse. Some nights the window was empty, and I'd convince myself it was over. But then, out of nowhere, I'd glance out and see the figure again. Always in the same spot, always facing my room, never moving. Finally, I worked up the courage to tell my parents again. I begged them to look for themselves. One night, I called them into my room right when I saw it. My mom rolled her eyes but humored me, pulling the blinds aside. The window was empty. "See?" she said. "There's nothing there." But the moment she walked out, I looked again, and it was back. That's when I realized whatever it was, it wanted only me to see it. One night, I made a mistake. Instead of hiding, I stared back. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself it wasn't real. Maybe I was just too tired of being scared. But I sat there at my desk, looking straight at the figure in the window. For the first time, it moved. Its head tilted slowly to the side, like it was curious. I felt my chest tighten. I thought about running to get my parents, but I couldn't move. And then, the figure lifted its hand and waved. Not a big wave, just a slow, deliberate raise of the arm, back and forth. I slammed my blinds shut so hard I almost ripped them off the wall. That night, I slept with my lights on. The next day, I finally told Alex, the same friend who had dared me into the mirror game. He came over that night with Jenna and another friend, saying if someone was squatting in the old house, they'd prove it. We stayed up late, all crowding at my window with the blinds barely open. Hours passed with nothing. They laughed, teased me, said I needed sleep. But at 2 a.m., Jenna whispered, "Oh my God." The figure was there, clear as day. We all froze. Nobody said a word. The figure didn't move, didn't wave this time, just stood there, watching. Alex swore under his breath. That's not possible. That was enough for him. He grabbed his phone and called the non-emergency police line. By the time an officer showed up 20 minutes later, the window was empty again. The cop checked the property, shining a flashlight through every window, walking around the perimeter. He came back and told us the same thing my parents had. The place was locked up, abandoned, and there was no sign of forced entry. We tried to argue, but he just shrugged. Sometimes old glass plays tricks on you. Reflections, shadows. "Don't worry about it, kids." But I knew it wasn't a trick. We all did. For a while after that, I refused to look outside at night. But one evening, about 2 weeks later, I slipped up. I was brushing my teeth before bed when I glanced toward the window. And this time, the figure wasn't across the street. It was in my yard, standing under the streetlight, facing my house. I froze, toothpaste dripping down my chin. I didn't even think. I ran downstairs screaming for my dad. He came charging up, but by the time we looked outside together, the yard was empty. My parents thought I was dreaming, hallucinating, anything but the truth. But I know what I saw, and I haven't opened my blinds after dark since. Because the worst part isn't that the figure followed me from the house. It's that I still see it sometimes. Not outside anymore, but inside, behind me, in the reflection of my window, watching. If you saw someone staring at you from an abandoned house, what's your first move? Tell me in chat. Sleep paralysis is one of those things you hear about but never think will happen to you. People describe waking up and not being able to move, sometimes feeling pressure on their chest, or seeing figures in their room. I'd always thought it sounded terrifying, but also maybe exaggerated. That is, until it happened to me. The first time was about 3 years ago. I had gone to bed late after cramming for a test. My room was pitch black, my phone charging on the nightstand. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. At least, my eyes did. The rest of me felt like it was pinned to the bed. I tried to move my fingers, my legs, nothing. It felt like I was trapped inside my own body. Panic set in immediately. My chest felt heavy, like someone was pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. That's when I noticed something else. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but the longer I looked, the more I realized it had shape. A tall, dark figure was standing at the foot of my bed. It didn't move. It just stood there, looming over me, its outline darker than the rest of the room. I couldn't make out its face, but I swear it was watching me. I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't open. My voice was gone. All I could do was stare. And then, slowly, it leaned forward. The figure bent closer and closer, until I could feel the weight of its presence right above me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. And that's when I heard it. In a low, rasping whisper, it said my name. I wanted to close my eyes, to make it go away, but I couldn't. I was trapped there, listening, as this thing, whatever it was, hovered inches from my face. Then, suddenly, like someone flipped a switch, I could move again. I bolted upright, gasping, drenched in sweat. The room was empty. No shadow, no figure, nothing but me, shaking in my bed. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I wish I could tell you that was the only time it happened, but it wasn't. Over the next few months, the episodes came back. Not every night, not even every week, but enough to make me dread falling asleep. Each time, it was the same. I'd wake up frozen, my eyes darting frantically around the room, only to find that figure standing somewhere nearby. Sometimes at the foot of my bed, sometimes in the corner. Once, it was crouched right next to me, like it had been waiting. And every time, it whispered my name. I started researching sleep paralysis online, desperate for answers. Some people said it was just the brain misfiring during REM sleep, a hallucination caused by being half awake, half dreaming. But others, they believed something else, that these weren't hallucinations at all, but something real. Entities that appear when your body is at its weakest. Visitors. The idea made me sick to my stomach, because deep down, that's what it felt like something was actually there. The scariest episode happened about 6 months after the first. I had gone to bed early because I was exhausted from work. At some point in the night, I slipped into paralysis again. This time, the figure wasn't at the foot of my bed. It was on the ceiling. I stared up in horror as this black, distorted shape clung to the plaster like some kind of twisted insect. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, stretching longer than they should have. Its head craned to look straight down at me. I tried to look away, but my eyes wouldn't close. Then it began to crawl. Slowly, impossibly, it crept down the ceiling toward the wall, its limbs stretching and cracking as it moved. Every sound echoed in my skull, like bones snapping with each movement. When it reached the wall closest to me, it stretched one arm down toward my bed. Its long, spindly fingers hovered just inches from my face, and in that same guttural whisper, it breathed my name again. I thought I was going to die. I thought if its fingers touched me, I'd never wake up. And then, just like before, I snapped free. I bolted upright, gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat. My eyes darted around the room. Nothing was there, but for the first time, I wasn't sure, because when I reached for my phone, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the wall, right where the thing had crawled down, there were faint scratch marks. 3 long, thin lines, dragging down the paint. After that night, I refused to sleep without the lights on. I even set up a camera in my room, hoping to catch something. Most nights, it recorded nothing but me tossing and turning. But one morning, I checked the footage and saw something that made me delete the file immediately. Around 3 a.m., the camera caught me lying perfectly still, paralyzed. My chest was rising and falling rapidly, like I was struggling to breathe. And for one frame, just one, there was a dark shape in the corner of the room. Tall, human-like, and in the next frame, it was gone. People always tell me, don't worry, sleep paralysis is just in your head. But here's the thing, I don't believe that anymore. Because things in your head don't leave scratch marks on your walls. They don't show up on cameras. And they don't whisper your name in a voice you've never heard before. Now, I still get episodes every so often. Not as often as before, but enough. And each time, the figure is closer. It doesn't always whisper now. Sometimes it just stands there, watching, waiting. But the last time it happened, it did something new. Instead of whispering my name, it whispered something else. One word, soon, and then I could move again. So, if you've ever experienced sleep paralysis, you probably know what I'm talking about. The fear, the helplessness, the way it feels too real to be a dream. But if you haven't, just hope you never do. Because once the visitor finds you, it doesn't stop coming back. And sooner or later, I think it's going to do more than whisper. Who here has ever had sleep paralysis before? If you have, type me in chat. This one didn't happen to me personally. It was told to me by a nurse who worked the night shift. If you've ever been inside a hospital late at night, you know it feels completely different from the daytime. During the day, it's busy, buzzing with movement and noise. Doctors making rounds, visitors coming and going, the constant beep of machines. But at night, it changes. The lights dim, the hallways are quieter, the corners darker. Every little sound, a footstep, a door creaking, a distant cough, feels amplified. And if you've ever pulled an overnight shift in a hospital, you know there's something about those empty corridors that can make your skin crawl. The nurse who told me this story said she'd gotten used to a lot of creepy things. She'd hear call bells ringing from empty rooms, elevators stopping on floors with no one inside, phones buzzing at the nurse's station only for the line to be dead when answered. But one night, she experienced something that shook her so badly, she still refuses to work that particular floor after dark. It was around 2 a.m. when it happened. She was doing her usual rounds on the long medical wing, checking vitals, making sure patients were comfortable. Everything seemed normal, but as she was walking back toward the nurse's station, she caught sight of something that made her stop in her tracks. Up ahead, about 30 feet down the hallway, was a man in a hospital gown. He was standing with his back to her, moving slowly down the corridor. His gown was open at the back, pale skin showing through, and he shuffled along in those loose hospital socks. At first, she didn't think much of it. Patients wandering at night isn't unusual. Sometimes they're confused for medication, sometimes they have dementia, sometimes they just can't sleep and get restless. But she also knew that particular hallway had no patient rooms at the far end, just a locked supply closet. "Sir," she called gently, keeping her voice calm so she wouldn't startle him. "Let's get you back to your room." The figure didn't respond. He just kept moving, slow and steady, until he was standing right in front of the supply closet door. She quickened her pace, worried he might hurt himself. But then, the man placed his hand on the knob of the locked door, and before she could get to him, before she could even say another word, he stepped forward. Straight through the door. The nurse froze. It wasn't like he opened it. The door never moved. He just walked through it, vanishing into the closet as if the wall wasn't even there. She stood there in shock, staring at the locked door. Her hands were shaking. She knew what she'd seen. Summoning her courage, she walked the rest of the way down the hall and grabbed the doorknob. As expected, it was locked tight. She pulled out her keys, unlocked it, and swung the door open. Inside, there was nothing, just shelves lined with extra linens, gloves, bandages, and a mop bucket. The patient was gone. She slammed the door shut and hurried back to the nurse's station, pale and rattled. She immediately checked the census sheet, the list of all patients on that floor. Every single one was accounted for, tucked into their rooms. The man in the hallway wasn't one of them. Still, she convinced herself maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe she was tired. Night shifts mess with your head sometimes. She tried to push it out of her mind. Until the next night, she was back on duty, this time with another nurse on shift with her. Around the same time, close to 2 a.m., the two of them were chatting at the station when they both went silent. Because down the hallway, they saw him again. The same man, same pale skin, same hospital gown, same shuffling walk. He was standing by the supply closet. This time, both of them stared, not daring to speak. The other nurse whispered, "Do you see that?" The figure turned slightly, just enough for them to catch a glimpse of his face. And it wasn't right. His eyes looked too dark, too sunken. His skin grayish. His mouth hung open, like he was mid-breath, except no sound came out. They both sat frozen as he lifted one hand and pressed it against the closet door. And then, just like the night before, he walked forward and disappeared. Gone. The other nurse gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. They walked down the hallway together, trembling, and opened the closet again. It was still empty. The two nurses swore they would never do that wing alone again. Over time, they started asking around quietly, wondering if anyone else had seen the same thing. And they learned something unsettling. Other staff had reported seeing the closet patient too, always at night, always between 1 and 3 a.m. One housekeeper swore she'd seen him drift past her cart without making a sound. A security guard admitted he'd once gone into the closet after seeing a shadow slip inside, only to find nothing. Some even claimed they knew who he was. Years ago, long before the nurse started working there, a man had been admitted to that hospital for a serious illness. He'd spent weeks confined to that floor. According to old staff, he often wandered at night when he couldn't sleep. His favorite spot to sit was at the very end of that hallway, leaning against the supply closet door. That's also where he passed away. The nurse said she doesn't tell this story to just anyone, because most people don't believe her. They laugh it off as exhaustion, or too much caffeine, or tricks from dim hospital lighting. But she knows what she saw, twice. And she said the scariest part isn't just seeing him in the hallway. It's the feeling that he's still trying to get into that closet. Like he's looking for something he left behind. Or like he's trapped, and that's the only door he knows how to use. So the next time you're in a hospital at night, pay attention to the hallways, especially the ones that feel too quiet, because sometimes the patients you see wandering around aren't alive anymore. Anyone here work in hospitals or night shifts? Drop your creepiest work story in the chat. I might read one later. When I was 17, I went through something I still don't have the right words for. It's one of those things I don't usually talk about because people either think I'm lying, or they try to give me some neat little explanation that doesn't even come close to what it felt like. But for me, it was real. It started when my grandma passed away. She and I had always been close. I spent most weekends at her house when I was younger, helping her bake cookies, listening to her old stories about life before I was even born, and sitting with her on the porch while she drank her tea and hummed to herself. She was more like a second mom than just a grandparent. Losing her felt like someone ripped a piece out of me. The funeral was quiet, small, mostly family. I remember standing by her coffin, staring at her hands folded neatly over her chest. Those were the hands that used to braid my hair, the hands that held mine when I was scared of thunderstorms. It didn't feel real that she was gone. It felt impossible. That first week afterward, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept expecting to dream of her, to hear her voice. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I had heard her calling my name, only to sit there in the silence of my dark room. My mom told me it was just grief playing tricks on me, and maybe it was. But what happened next, grief doesn't explain that. It was exactly a week after the funeral. I remember because I had been lying awake in bed, staring at the glowing numbers on my alarm clock. It was 1:59 a.m. when I finally decided I'd get up, grab some water, and maybe scroll my phone until I got tired. But then my phone lit up on the nightstand. The screen glowed in the darkness, and the ringtone pierced the quiet of my room. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Who calls at 2 in the morning? When I reached for it, I froze. The name flashing on the screen made my chest tighten like I couldn't breathe. It said Grandma. I just stared at it, my heart racing. That wasn't possible. My mom and I had packed her belongings a few days ago, including her phone. It was shut off, the service disconnected. I had watched my uncle cancel the plan himself. So how could her number be calling me now? The phone rang again, vibrating on the nightstand, as if demanding an answer. I should have ignored it. I know that, but part of me was desperate to hear her voice again, even if it was some kind of glitch. My thumb hovered over the green button before I finally pressed it. At first, there was just static, a faint crackling, like wind blowing through an old radio. I whispered, "Hello." My voice shook, and then I heard it, a faint, almost broken whisper. "I'm still here." It was her voice. I swear to you, it was her voice. The same soft tone she used when I was little, when she'd comfort me after a nightmare. I sat there, frozen, clutching the phone to my ear as my hands trembled. I tried to speak, to say anything back, but before I could, the line went dead. Just silence. The call ended on its own. I sat awake the rest of that night, staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring again. But it didn't. The next morning, I checked my call log, hoping maybe I'd imagined it. But no, it was there. 2 a.m. Incoming call, Grandma. When I showed my mom, her face went pale. She didn't know what to say. She just told me not to dwell on it, that maybe the carrier recycled the number earlier than expected. But I knew that wasn't it. Numbers don't get reassigned within a week. And even if they did, what were the chances that the new owner would call me at 2 in the morning and whisper words only my grandma would say? For a long time after that, I wondered if it had really been her. Maybe she wanted me to know she wasn't gone completely, that she was still watching over me. Or maybe it wasn't her at all. Maybe it was something else. Something that just used her voice because it knew I would answer. I still keep that phone, even though I've changed numbers since. I don't use it anymore, but I can't bring myself to throw it away. The call log is still there, frozen in time. Proof that it wasn't a dream. Proof that, for one night, the dead really can reach out to the living. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had stayed on the line longer. Would she have said more? Would I have heard something I wasn't meant to? Or was that whisper already the warning? The truth is, I'll never know. But one thing's for sure, every time my phone rings late at night now, my chest tightens, and for a split second, I'm afraid I'll see her name on the screen again. Would you answer a call from a dead loved one? Yes or no? I'm curious to see what the chat thinks. That was 10 true paranormal stories. Thanks for hanging out during this live stream. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and check out the playlist linked in the description for even more scary stories. And hey, if you've got your own creepy experiences, send them in. You might just hear your story in the next live stream. Welcome, everyone. Tonight we're doing something special. a live read-along of 10 terrifying real paranormal encounters. As I go through each story, I'll pause to check in with the chat, hear your thoughts, and maybe even read some of your own experiences if you want to share. So grab your headphones, dim the lights, and let's get into it. I grew up in an old 2-story house that my parents bought when I was about 6 years old. It was built sometime in the 1920s, and although it had been renovated here and there, most of its structure still felt original. The hardwood floors, the old wallpaper, and most of all, the staircase. That staircase was the kind of thing you'd see in a classic horror movie. It had a polished wooden banister, but the steps themselves were warped with age. They didn't just squeak. They groaned and cracked like they were straining under invisible weight. During the day, the sound was almost comforting, a reminder that the house was lived in. But at night, that creaking became something else entirely. Started when I was around 12. Almost every night, sometime after 2 in the morning, I'd hear the same thing, slow, deliberate footsteps on those stairs. They were heavy, not like my mom's or my sister's light steps, and not hurried like my dad's when he got up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. These footsteps had weight to them, a steady rhythm. The first time it happened, I was sure it was my dad. Maybe he was checking the doors or grabbing a glass of water. But curiosity got the better of me, so I quietly slid out of bed and cracked my door open just enough to peek into the hallway. Nothing. The hallway was dark, and the faint nightlight plugged in at the end of the hall cast its usual dim glow. The sound of footsteps had stopped the moment I opened my door, like whoever or whatever it was had frozen in place. I stared into that empty hallway for what felt like an eternity. My heart was pounding, but eventually I convinced myself I was just tired and imagining things. I shut the door, crawled back into bed, and tried to fall asleep, but I couldn't shake it. The following nights, the same thing happened. The footsteps, the climb up the stairs, always around the same time, always stopping right outside my door. I'd hold my breath, listening so closely that my ears would ring from the silence afterward. Weeks turned into months, and it became almost routine. I'd go to bed wondering if I'd hear them again, and sure enough, around 2 o'clock in the morning, that familiar creak of the first stair would start. Then another, until they reached the top landing. And then silence. I tried telling my parents, but they brushed it off. "Old houses make noise," my dad said. My mom suggested it was just the wood expanding and contracting with the temperature. Even my older sister teased me about it, saying I was letting scary movies get into my head. But I knew what I was hearing. Wood expanding didn't mimic the exact rhythm of footsteps, so I decided to test it. One night, I left my door cracked open just an inch or two, just enough for me to see the hallway without being obvious. I turned off my lamp, pulled the covers up to my chin, and waited. Sure enough, the footsteps came. Slow, heavy, deliberate. They climbed the stairs closer and closer, until I could see the faint outline of a shadow cast against the far wall. My breath caught in my throat. The steps stopped right outside my room. I could see something there, just the faintest shape, darker than the hallway around it, like someone was standing directly in front of my door.